Children of Eden. As a father of 4 children, it is easy to observe that young children do not inhabit the same world that adults do. They do not inhabit the mental world of facts, information, knowledge, and conceptual understanding. Rather, they inhabit a world of wonder, fascination, play, fun, excitement, and imagination. They inhabit the world of their heart. Adults often say condescendingly that children are naive to live in such a world, that they will soon enough learn the ways of the real world. But who is happier? Who is freer? Who is more in touch with the joy and wonder of being alive? Adults can often be very arrogant about the superiority of their learned ways, whereas children are embodiments of humility. Wide-eyed, they accept information from their elders as facts, as absolute truths, and they assume that the adults around them are wiser than them in every way, which of course they are not. For where is the wisdom in losing touch with your joy and your sense of freedom? Where is the wisdom in becoming burdened down by so much unnecessary mental information, troubling thoughts, and oppressive emotions that you can no longer enjoy the beauty of life? This is what happens to children as they are schooled and educated to be like adults, to think like adults, to divide the world up and conceptually label it like adults do, to judge and criticize like adults, to feel guilty about being who they are like adults do, to spend so much of their time wandering around in the realms of thought just like adults do. It is very revealing that we call ourselves adults, because the dictionary definition of the word adulterate means to render something poorer in quality by adding another substance. Its synonyms are make impure, degrade, debase, spoil, taint, defile, contaminate, pollute. My goodness, this tells us so very, very much. What substance has been added to the child to render it poorer in quality, to contaminate it? It is knowledge, conceptual knowledge. The story of the Garden of Eden is a perfect metaphor for this, with Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge and immediately losing their innocence. In that moment of receiving knowledge, they stopped being the innocent children of God, and they became adults, adulterated, self-conscious, and contaminated by what the snake offered them, a mental realm of conceptual understanding, of dualism, of good and evil, love and hate, light and darkness, right and wrong, a world of judgment rather than innocence. The snake with its forked tongue represents the verbal imparting of this dualistic perception of the world, a conceptual world of opposites, of conflict and disharmony. Through the spoken word, through the dissemination of conceptual information, this dualistic realm is created within the mind of the listener. It is constructed entirely of thoughts, of the conceptual imagery that we call knowledge, which is ultimately illusory. It is a world of abstraction, created by a sophisticated mind. It is worth noting that the word sophisticated comes from the Latin word sophisticatus, meaning tampered with. In the Garden of Innocence, which represents childhood, the purity of the human being was tampered with, as the appealing words of the snake encouraged Eve to bite the apple. The biting of the apple represents the consumption of conceptual information, of knowledge, which then becomes part of our body, just as food does. So not only does the mind, but also the body become contaminated. It became susceptible to death, to strife and suffering, to inner conflict, division and disease. It was quite literally poisoned by knowledge, as was the mind in its becoming fragmented, divided and dualistic. A divided mind can only perceive a divided world, a world of conflicting and disturbing information, which masquerades as desirable and factual knowledge. The word knowledge makes it seem somewhat valuable, but it would be more accurate to say abstraction, which is truly an illusion. A pure, childlike mind does not perceive this illusory and divided world. It perceives a unified and divine world, undivided and totally interconnected. The adults perceive the waves, named in their myriad of shapes, sizes, colours and functions, whereas the unconditioned child's mind perceives the ocean as a whole, unnamed and undivided. This is very much to do with the fact that children are open-minded towards everything, holding no prejudice. They are open-hearted too, because they have no reason to expect that life will hurt them, so they do not close their hearts in fear of life, as adults tend to do. Young children do not try and hide who they truly are and masquerade like adults do. They are genuine, open, honest and unself-conscious. They are free. This is evident from their enjoyment and comfort of being naked outdoors, as Adam and Eve originally were. To run around, play and interact, totally free of self-consciousness. For a child, the natural world is paradise, a magical playground. It is fascinating and absorbing. They demand nothing from it. They just want to explore it and immerse themselves in it. Unless they hurt themselves in some way, there is very little concern about their own self, and they forget themselves very easily. But what does our society teach children? It teaches them to focus upon themselves, to become concerned about their appearance, to be insecure about how they appear to others, to carefully present themselves in a self-conscious and well-thought-out way, not only sartorially, but also in terms of their personality. The freedom and courage to show yourself exactly as you are is not encouraged. Quite the opposite. And what does society do to the minds of children? As soon as it can, it begins to educate them in the ways of knowledge, to sophisticate their mind. Even as parents, we start to explain the world in terms of facts and information, so that our children begin to relate to the world through these conceptual filters very early on. This is totally normal in our society, and who would question the wisdom of doing so? But what happens to our children as they absorb more and more information, facts and knowledge about the world and how society operates? Do they become happier, more creative, more inspired? Or do they become top-heavy, more cerebral, more detached from their life force, their feelings, and their enthusiasm for living? Essentially, we train them to become well-adjusted, functional, and productive members of society, so that they can contribute to and hopefully improve the world. But what is the cost of this overburdening of their mind? As they lose their innocence, their joy, their passion, and their sense of wonder and excitement, what are children really contributing to the world? Don't we really need more of these qualities in our increasingly pessimistic and anxious world? Perhaps it is the very absence of these essential qualities among the general population that makes us collectively so negative, depressive, pessimistic, argumentative, critical, judgmental, and afraid. We have gotten trapped in an entirely uninspiring and limited conceptual worldview, which exists only within our minds, and we have lost touch with the infinitely more inspiring realm of joy, creativity, excitement, laughter and spontaneity that brings life into our lives and into the world. We have lost touch with the realm of our heart. We have become adulterated by the dualistic whisperings of knowledge encouraged by our fact-driven society, whisperings that tell us all the things we ought to want to know about the world, and a great deal of it is not very pleasant. We get drawn further and further into our mind as its furnishings become more and more complicated, elaborate, enticing, more detailed and sophisticated. We construct a mental realm which superficially appears to have everything we need, and we try to inhabit it. It provides us with our sense of security. It provides us with all the wants and desires that bring us worldly pleasures and material satisfaction. But there is no depth to be found there. There is no joy to be found there, no freedom, no inspiration and awe. They all come from our heart. It is only the mind where we encounter darkness, doubt, fear, judgment and isolation, because these are all created through the processes of thinking, and they begin to form at a surprisingly young age. Many children are afflicted by these qualities early on in their life, as the world encroaches on their world of innocence and wonder. Of course, we say this is just an inevitable part of growing up, but it really depends on how we want our children to mature and operate in this world. As loving parents, we naturally want our children to blossom, grow, and flourish happily, to engage deeply with their creativity, with their gifts and passions, not to become anxious, troubled, depressed, and frustrated. But sadly, this is usually the case in our society, and it can be observed if you look at groups of young adolescents. Inspiration, joy, and enthusiasm are clearly lacking, whereas self-consciousness, anxiety, and insecurity are plain to see. Do we really want to fully adulterate our children and condition their phenomenally brilliant consciousness to the same extent that ours was? Or do we want to do everything we can to keep their innocence, enthusiasm, and joy alive, and nurture their sense of being at one with the natural world? Keep in mind that there is literally no substitute for the heartfelt connection to the natural world which children instinctively possess. It is an essential part of our identity, as we are expressions of our natural habitat, which is what the natural world is. We are part of it. We have a deep interrelationship with it that goes far beyond what we can understand, and it is vital to our creativity and to our deeper enjoyment of life. So it is crucial to understand that if these deeply positive and essential aspects of a child's personality fade away and become forgotten by them, it is a momentous challenge to re-inspire them. Do you know how to restore a child's sense of innocence, joy, enthusiasm, and connection with the natural world? It is a near impossible task once a child has been burdened down with the full heaviness of our conceptual interpretations of the world and the ideologies of their society. But eventually, later on in life, healing and transformation will impose themselves in a person's life. What usually happens is that the adultness runs a certain course, and it leads the person, the child, to a certain distance away from their innocence, vulnerability, and freedom of their heart. The person becomes so corrupted by the world, and remember that we are all adulterated children in grown-up bodies, that the person will either suffer from depression, a nervous breakdown, or some other life crisis, like a life-threatening illness, or perhaps even a serious accident. There will be a serious wake-up call at some point in their life, which will shake their foundations, and if they are lucky, they will realize how deeply lost they had become in their mental misunderstandings about the nature of the world and themselves. They will realize how far away from their heart, from their true self, they had strayed, and as a result, they will strive to reorient themselves within its gravitational field. This is a kind of rebirth, a new beginning, where we are given the opportunity to reconstruct our dwelling place upon the rock-solid foundations of compassion, gratitude and love, rather than upon the sands of conceptual knowledge. We can all return to the Garden of Eden, back to a state of innocence and joy, humility and gratitude. We were not banished by a divine force. We were simply poisoned by knowledge. As a result, we became deeply mentally unwell, and thus deeply lost in a very disturbing nightmare, in which we turned our back on everything that we could ever have possibly longed for, which is paradise. We turned our back on this in favour of the illusory promise of something greater which never existed in the first place. It was a chase for the mirage of some future reward, some future haven, created by our own thoughts, which we could never ever reach, because it never existed. Once we realize this, we will see that Eden exists before our very eyes, and always has done. We were simply blind to it. It is the beautiful marriage between our heart and the earth, the latter being a reflection of the former. As our heart becomes stronger, purer, and unadulterated by the toxicity of conceptual knowledge, we can perceive the world through the heart's divine lens. As love looks out upon the world, it sees itself everywhere, expressed in a way that enables it to communicate with itself in a state of deep joy and ecstasy, like two lovers caressing each other in full awareness that they are one and the same consciousness, looking out through different eyes. Indeed, we are all this, but many of us are still looking at the nightmare, playing upon the screen of our own mind, believing its story, its projection of the future, when we could instead be beholding and enjoying the true divinity of life. Knowledge corrupted and poisoned us all, making us argue, judge, fight, hate and suffer, when there was absolutely no need for any of this, because none of it was ultimately true. We were sick, deeply unwell and afraid, and much of our suffering was created through our deep and primal need to feel secure in what seemed like a very threatening world. But we will be healed of all of this, as we simply decide to renounce all that we think we know, by realizing its illusory nature. If we want to know what is true, if we wish to be illuminated by the highest truth, we must turn our attention towards our own heart, for it is there we will find the depth and meaning that we were searching for in our understanding of the world. There is truly nothing to understand in the world that will illuminate our soul in the way we are longing for. The sense of awe and magnificence, freedom and joy that we encounter as we learn to fully occupy our heart is indescribable. Suffice to say that it fulfills every need that we have, including the need for total security and safety. The need to hide in fear evaporates, and we can live in the full presence of the higher consciousness that we have hidden from for so very long. We were never punished, and we never will be punished, for all punishment is self-inflicted. When we are cold and we deeply crave the warmth of the sun, it would simply be denying ourselves, punishing ourselves, to go and hide in a dark cave. The sun cannot reach in there and find you. You have to step out into its light and know that it will not harm you. It will warm you to your very core. It will heal all your woes and illuminate all your misunderstandings about what is real. The shadows of doubt will vanish. The coldness and darkness will become distant memories, and you will remember once again how to dwell in the realm which is your original home, as security, trust and joy are fully restored to your loving and thankful heart.